The taste of my 18th birthday was instant coffee and stale vending machine crackers. I remember that detail because it was the last meal I would ever eat as a ward of the state. The last morning I would wake up in a bed that belonged to someone else. The last time I would look in a mirror and see a boy with no past and no future. March 15th, a Tuesday. The kind of gray, drizzling morning that makes everything feel like an ending. I sat in the waiting room of the Department of Children and Family Services in Boston. My entire life packed into a single black duffel bag at my feet, 18 years of existence, and this was all I had to show for it. 3 changes of clothes, a worn paperback copy of East of Eden that I had read 11 times, a photograph of my brother Silas taken 2 years ago, his gap-toothed smile already fading at the edges from how many times I had held it. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the plastic chair dug into my spine. Somewhere down the hall, a child was crying. I had heard that sound so many times in so many buildings that it had become background noise. The soundtrack of the unwanted. My name is Rowan Aldrich, and on the morning I turned 18, I owned nothing in this world except a duffel bag, a dead woman's last name, and a decade of anger that I carried like a stone in my chest. Miss Tiernan appeared in the doorway, sensible heels clicking against the linoleum. She was a good woman. I had known enough bad ones to recognize the difference. She carried a manila folder that seemed too thin to contain the complete documentation of a human life. And yet there it was. Everything I was reduced to a few sheets of paper. She sat down across from me and I saw something in her eyes that I had learned to recognize over the years. The look that adults get when they are about to deliver news they wish they did not have to give. Rowan, she said, and the way she said my name told me everything. Today was my expiration date. I know, I said. I am 18. I am no longer your responsibility. She winced at the word responsibility, as if it were something sharp, as if I had meant it to cut. Maybe I had. After a decade in the system, you learn to build walls out of words. She slid the folder across the table. Inside were the documents I would need to exist in the world as an adult. Birth certificate, social security card, a list of shelters and job training programs printed on paper so thin I could see my fingers through it. There is something else, she said, and her voice changed, softened in a way that made me look up. She pulled out a second envelope. This one was different, older. The paper yellowed at the edges, my name written across the front in a handwriting I did not recognize. Spidery and elegant, the kind of penmanship they do not teach anymore. This arrived about 3 weeks ago, she said, from a law firm in New Hampshire. We were instructed to hold it until your birthday. I stared at the envelope. New Hampshire. The words meant nothing to me. I had never been to New Hampshire. I did not know anyone in New Hampshire. I did not know anyone anywhere. What is it? She hesitated. It appears to be a notification of inheritance. I almost laughed. The sound came out wrong, more like a cough. Inheritance. The word was absurd. Inheritance was for people with families, people with histories, people who belonged somewhere, who died. Miss Tiernan's eyes were careful. Your grandmother, Vivian Aldrich. She passed away 14 months ago. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Not because I remembered her, I did not, but because I had spent a decade trying to forget that she existed. I do not want it, I said. The words came out flat, automatic, a reflex built from years of learning not to want anything. Miss Tiernan sighed. It was the sound of a woman who had seen too many children walk out these doors with nothing but a bag and a chip on their shoulder. You need to at least read it, Rowan. It is a legal matter. There is property involved. And according to the letter, there is also a significant debt. Of course there was. Of course the woman who had abandoned me would find a way to burden me even from the grave. Even in death, she was handing me weight I had not asked to carry. I took the envelope. The paper felt fragile, ancient. I could feel the ghost of the hand that had addressed it. Someone had written my name with care, with intention, as if the name itself meant something. I opened it. Inside were 2 documents. The first was from a law firm, formal language, legal terminology, the cold precision of attorneys. It informed me that I was the sole beneficiary of my grandmother's estate, which consisted of a property located on Sugar Maple Road in Ashford, New Hampshire, 85 acres, a farmhouse, various outbuildings. It also informed me that the property was encumbered by $52,000 in unpaid taxes. If not paid within 60 days, the county would seize the land and auction it. The second document was from something called Ridge Haven Development Corporation, an offer to purchase the property for $175,000. The letter was friendly in that aggressive way that corporate communications always are. It mentioned the tax debt. It mentioned the difficulty of maintaining rural property. It mentioned several times how generous their offer was. It gave me 45 days to decide. So that was my inheritance. Not a gift, but a trap. A piece of land I had never seen drowning in debt with vultures circling. I was about to crumple both letters and toss them in the trash when I noticed something else in the envelope. A smaller envelope, older and more worn. My name written on it in that same spidery hand, but the ink was different, faded. This letter had been written years ago, across the front, in careful script, 6 words. Only open when you reach the farm. I do not know why that stopped me. I do not know why those 6 words felt like a hook in my chest. But they did. I looked at Miss Tiernan. She was watching me with an expression I could not quite read. "What would you do?" I asked her. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I think I would want to know, even if the answer was painful. I think I would need to know why." "Why she left us," I said. It was not a question. Yes, I looked at the numbers again. 52,000 in debt, 175,000 offered. Do the math. Walk away with over 100,000. Split it with Silas. That was 50,000 each. Enough to rent an apartment. Enough to take some classes. Enough to disappear and start over somewhere new. The easy choice, the smart choice. But there was that smaller envelope, that handwriting, that instruction. Only open when you reach the farm. She wanted me to come, I said. She set this up so I would come. It appears that way. I thought about Silas. 60 days until California. 60 days until I lost my brother forever. Then Miss Tiernan told me something that made every other thought in my head go quiet. "There is more," she said. Her voice had dropped. "About Silas, my brother, my 15-year-old brother, currently living in a group home 90 miles north of here. The only person in the world who shared my blood. The only person I had left." "What about him?" She pulled out another document. Official, state letterhead. The kind of paper that meant decisions had been made without consulting the people those decisions affected. "There is a family in California," she said. "They have expressed interest in adopting him. The process has been moving forward for several months. Given your aging out of the system and the lack of other viable family connections," she did not need to finish. I understood the math. I was 18 and broke and homeless as of today. I had no legal standing to care for Silas. I had no home to offer him. I had nothing. How long? 60 days. The placement is scheduled for mid-May. 60 days, 2 months. That was all the time I had left with my brother. All the time before they shipped him across the country to strangers. Before they completed what the system had started a decade ago when it separated us into different foster homes, different towns, different lives. The group home where Silas lived was in New Hampshire, 40 miles from a town called Ashford. I made my decision in that moment, not with hope, not with faith, with the cold arithmetic of desperation. Before I left, I asked to use the office phone. I called the group home where Silas was staying. The administrator answered on the third ring. Her voice was tight with something that sounded like worry. "I need to speak with my brother," I said. "Silas Aldrich." There was a long pause. Too long. "Mr. Aldrich," she said finally, "your brother is not here." "What do you mean he is not there? He ran away. Last night, we have filed a missing persons report with the police." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Silas, 15 years old, lone somewhere in New Hampshire in the middle of March. Where would he go, I asked. But I already knew the answer. We do not know. But he took his backpack and his coat. It appeared to be planned. I hung up the phone. My hands were steady, but my heart was racing. Silas had run away the night before my birthday, the night before I aged out of the system. He had seen this coming. He had known they were going to separate us for good. And I knew with a certainty that went beyond logic exactly where he was headed. 3 hours later, I was on a Greyhound bus heading north. My duffel bag was in the overhead compartment. The envelope was in my jacket pocket, pressed against my heart. Through the grimy window, I watched Boston disappear behind me, the only city I had ever known fading into gray. I did not know what I would find in New Hampshire. I did not know if my grandmother's farm was worth saving. I did not know if there were answers waiting for me or just more questions. But I knew one thing. I was going to find my brother. And together we were going to figure out what the hell was going on. The bus rumbled north through the Massachusetts countryside, then crossed into New Hampshire. The landscape changed. Cities gave way to suburbs, suburbs to small towns to forests. The trees were still bare, winter's grip only just beginning to loosen, but I could see the first hints of spring in the swelling buds, the faintest suggestion that something was coming alive beneath the cold. I pressed my forehead against the glass and watched the miles unspool. Somewhere in these hills was a farm, 85 acres of land that belonged to me, a house where my grandmother had lived and died, a past I had never known, and somewhere hopefully was my brother. By the time we reached Ashford, it was nearly dark. The bus pulled into what passed for a station, which was really just a parking lot next to a gas station with a hand-painted sign that said bus stop. I was the only one who got off. The cold hit me immediately, not the damp, dirty cold of Boston winters, but something sharper, cleaner. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke and something else I could not identify. Something sweet. The town was small, one main street lined with old brick buildings, a church with a white steeple, a hardware store with rakes displayed in the window, a diner with a flickering neon sign that said Rosie's. I stood there in the parking lot, my duffel bag over my shoulder, my breath forming clouds in the evening air. I scanned the street for any sign of Silas. Nothing, no familiar face, no lanky 15-year-old with our mother's dark hair and those sharp, watchful eyes that made him look older than his years. But then I heard it, a voice, calling my name. Rowan. I turned, and there he was. Silas was sitting on a bench outside the hardware store, his backpack at his feet, a cup of something hot in his hands. He looked tired and cold and defiant. He looked exactly like I felt. He stood up as I walked toward him. We stared at each other for a long moment. Two brothers who had been separated by a system that did not care about love. Two orphans who had learned to survive alone. Then Silas spoke. I am not going to California. His voice cracked on the last word. He was trying so hard to sound brave. I read the administrator's emails. I know about the farm. I know you got the letter. And I am not letting them ship me across the country while you figure out what to do. How long have you been here? Since this morning. I hitched a ride to a bus station, then used my emergency money for a ticket. He lifted his chin. I knew you would come. I did not know whether to yell at him or hug him. So I did both. I grabbed him and pulled him into my arms, holding him so tight I could feel his heart beating against my chest. He stiffened at first, surprised. We had not hugged in years. The system does not encourage physical affection between siblings. Too complicated, too risky, too much paperwork if someone files a complaint. But then his arms came up and wrapped around me, and he was holding on just as tight, and I felt his shoulders start to shake. I have got you, I said. I am not letting go. We stood there on the main street of Ashford, New Hampshire. Two broken pieces of the same whole, and we held on for dear life. The bell above the diner door chimed as we walked in. The warmth hit us like a wave, along with the smell of coffee and bacon and something baking. After a day of traveling in the cold, it felt like stepping into another world. The diner was cozy in that way that small-town diners always are. Red vinyl booths, a long counter lined with stools, local newspapers scattered on tables. A few customers sat around nursing cups of coffee, looking up briefly as we entered. Behind the counter stood a woman in her early 60s, silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She was wiping down the counter, but her hands went still the moment she saw us. For a long moment, she just stared. Her expression shifted through several emotions. Surprise, recognition, and something that might have been grief. Well, she said finally. Her voice carried the weight of years. I knew this day would come eventually. I just did not expect it to be today. I blinked. I am sorry. Do we know you? No, she said, but I know you, or at least I know those eyes. She set down her rag and leaned against the counter. You have to be Vivian's boys. There is no other explanation for faces like those walking into my diner. Our grandmother, you knew her. Knew her. The woman let out a sound that was not quite a laugh. Honey, I knew Vivian Aldrich for 40 years. I was there when she buried her husband. I was there when she took in those two little boys whose mother had passed. And I was there when she made the hardest decision of her life. The other customers had stopped pretending not to listen. They were all looking at us now, their faces a mixture of curiosity and something else. Sympathy, maybe? Or memory? My name is Mabel, the woman said. Mabel Rawlings. And if you are who I think you are, you must have a lot of questions. I sat down at the counter. Silas slid onto the stool beside me. My legs felt weak. My mind was spinning. I am Rowan Aldrich, I said. This is my brother Silas. We just found out our grandmother left us her farm. I do not know anything about her. I do not remember her at all. Mabel nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had long suspected. Of course you do not. You were only 8 when she sent you away. Your brother was even younger, Silas said quietly. I was 5. Mabel's eyes went soft. She poured 2 cups of coffee and set them in front of us, without asking. Drink these. You both look like you have been traveling all day on nothing but vending machine food. She turned to the kitchen. Margie, make up 2 plates for these young men. The works. She turned back to us. Her expression was serious now. You came here to see the farm. We came here to understand, I said, and to figure out what to do about the property. The developers, Mabel said flatly. They contacted you. They offered to buy the land, pay off the taxes, and give us what is left over. Mabel's expression hardened in a way that told me everything I needed to know about what she thought of that offer. I bet they did. Those vultures have been circling this land for years. Your grandmother spent the last decade of her life fighting them off. 2 plates appeared in front of us. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, rolls that were still warm from the oven. Real food, home-cooked food. I could not remember the last time I had eaten something that had not come from a package or a microwave. Eat, Mabel commanded, then we will talk. We ate, and while we ate, the diner began to empty out. The other customers left one by one, nodding to Mabel as they went casting curious glances at us. By the time we finished our plates, we were alone. Mabel poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down on a stool across from us. Your grandmother loved you, she said. Both of you. More than you could possibly understand. What she did sending you away, it was not because she wanted to. It was because she believed she had no other choice. I set down my fork. The food sat heavy in my stomach. Everyone has a choice. Not everyone, Mabel said. Not when powerful people want what you have. Not when they are willing to hurt anyone who gets in their way. She looked toward the window, her eyes distant. Ridge Haven Development. They started buying up land in this area about 12 years ago. Had plans for some big ski resort. Luxury condos. The whole 9 yards. Most folks around here, we are not rich people. The land is all we have. And when someone comes along offering 6 figures for property that has been in your family for generations, well, a lot of people said yes, but our grandmother did not. No, Mabel's voice was quiet now. Vivian did not. That farm had been in your family since 1952. Her husband cleared that land with his own 2 hands. They built that house together, board by board, raised their children there, buried their children there. She paused, and I saw her jaw tighten. When Vivian said no, Ridgehaven did not take it well. They started with lawyers, threats about easements, property lines, water rights. When that did not work, they got creative. Fences cut in the night. Equipment sabotaged. Someone poisoned her well. I felt something cold settle in my chest. They threatened her. Not just threatened. Mabel looked at me and there was something fierce in her eyes. They made it clear that if she did not sell, there would be consequences. And then they mentioned you boys. The cold spread. I could feel it in my fingers, in my spine. You and Silas were living with her then. Your mother had passed. Your father was long gone. Vivian was all you had. And Ridgehaven knew that. They knew that if they wanted to hurt her, really hurt her, all they had to do was threaten her grandsons. My grip on my coffee cup tightened until my knuckles went white. She sent us away to protect us. Mabel nodded. She went to the sheriff. Old Sheriff Harlan Pruitt told him what was happening. But Ridgehaven has deep pockets, lawyers, connections, money that never stops flowing. The sheriff said he could not prove anything, said his hands were tied. So she gave us up, I said. Put us in the foster system where they could not find us. Where you would be just two more files in a system full of files, Mabel said. Anonymous? Safe. I sat there and I listened and I felt the anger rising in my chest like steam in a boiler. Not less anger, more. Because now the anger had a story to go with it, and the story made it worse. That is what you want me to believe, I said. My voice was harder than I intended. That she had no choice. That the foster system was her only option. That a grandmother who supposedly loved her grandsons more than anything could find no other way to protect them than to hand them over to strangers and walk away. Mabel watched me steadily. She did not flinch. She could have moved, I continued. She could have taken us anywhere. She could have sold the damn farm and disappeared. But she did not. She kept the land and gave up us. She chose dirt over her own blood. Mabel was quiet for a long time. The diner was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of wind against the windows. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful. Measured. I understand why you see it that way, she said. And I am not going to sit here and tell you your pain is not real. It is real. Every year you spent in that system is real. But I will tell you this, I watched Vivian Aldrich after she sent you away. I watched her for 10 years. And what I saw was not a woman who had made an easy choice. What I saw was a woman who had cut out her own heart and was trying to figure out how to keep breathing without it. She leaned forward. Go up to the farm, Rowan. Look at what she left you. Then decide what you believe. I did not answer, because I was not ready to hear it. Not yet. The walls I had built over 10 years were thick, and they did not come down because a woman in a diner told me a story. They did not come down because someone said the word love. There is a room above the diner, Mabel said. Nothing fancy, but it is clean and warm. You can stay there tonight, both of you, no charge. I started to protest. Your grandmother helped me when I needed it most, she said. Loaned me the money to keep this diner open when the bank would not give me another cent. Never asked for a dime of it back. This is the least I can do. I nodded. Not because I was grateful, because I was tired, bone tired. The kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than the body. The kind that lives in the soul. Go on, she said. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. I barely slept that night. The room above the diner was small but comfortable. Twin brass beds, a window that looked out over Main Street. Silas fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from his journey. But I lay there in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a small town at night, and I thought about Vivian Aldrich, a woman I had spent a decade hating for abandoning me, a woman who, according to Mabel Rawlings, had given me up not because she did not love me, but because she loved me too much to let me be hurt. I wanted to believe it. Part of me desperately wanted to believe that there was a reason for the pain, that someone had wanted me after all. But another part of me, the part that had built walls to survive, was not ready to let those walls down. Not yet. Not until I saw the proof for myself. The smaller envelope was still in my jacket pocket, only open when you reached the farm. I had not opened it yet. It felt like a promise I was not ready to make and could not afford to break. Morning came slowly. I watched the sky lighten through the window, gray giving way to pale pink, then gold. The town came to life below me. A pickup truck rumbled past. Someone unlocked the door to the hardware store. The smell of coffee drifted up from the diner kitchen. I woke Silas and we went downstairs. Mabel was already behind the counter, and she was not alone. A man sat at one of the stools, his back to us. He was big, broad-shouldered, silver hair that had once been dark. When he turned around, I saw a face like a weathered map, all lines and angles, with eyes that were surprisingly gentle. This is Guthrie Brennan, Mabel said. He is going to take you up to the farm. The man extended a hand. His grip was firm but not crushing. You look like her, he said simply. Same eyes, same stubborn set to the jaw. I did not know what to say to that, so I just nodded. Eat some breakfast, Mabel said, sliding plates in front of us. Then Guthrie will drive you up. We ate quickly. My mind was already on that mountain, already at the farm, already searching for answers. 20 minutes later, we were in the cab of Guthrie's ancient Ford pickup, bouncing up a dirt road that wound through the forest like a snake. The trees pressed close on either side, their bare branches reaching toward the gray sky. Guthrie did not talk much, which I appreciated. He seemed like a man who understood the value of silence. But about halfway up the mountain he spoke. "I knew your grandmother," he said. His voice was low, rough, like gravel in a tumbler. "Knew her for 30 years, best woman I ever met." I looked at him, waiting. She was stronger than anyone I ever knew. What she did for you boys, giving you up like that. It broke her, but she did it anyway, because that is who she was. She always did what needed to be done, even when it hurt. The road curved sharply and suddenly the trees fell away. We emerged onto a ridge and I saw the valley spread out below us, rolling hills covered in forest, a river glinting silver in the morning light. It was beautiful, in a way that made my chest ache. "Almost there," Guthrie said. A few more minutes of winding road, and then we turned onto a gravel drive. A rusted mailbox stood at the entrance, the name Aldrich barely visible under years of weather. The drive curved through the trees and then the house came into view. It was a two-story Victorian farmhouse, painted white though the paint had faded and peeled over the years. The porch wrapped around the front and one side sagging slightly in the middle. Some of the windows were dark, covered with boards. The roof looked like it needed work. But despite the neglect, there was something about the house that spoke of sturdiness, of endurance, like it had been built to last and it intended to do exactly that. Behind the house, I could see a large barn-like structure. Red paint faded to rust, and beyond that, stretching up the hillside, row after row of maple trees. Thousands of them, their bare branches strung with a web of metal tubing that caught the morning light. "The sugar house," Guthrie said, nodding toward the barn. "That is where the magic happens, or it used to." He pulled the truck to a stop in front of the house and killed the engine. "This is it," he said. "This is your inheritance, Mom." We sat there for a long moment, just looking. Silas was the first to move. He opened his door and stepped out, his eyes wide as he took in the property. I followed, my boots crunching on the gravel. And then something happened that I did not expect. Silas stopped walking. He stood perfectly still, his head tilted slightly as if he were listening to something I could not hear. "I remember this," he said softly. I stared at him. "What?" He pointed toward the porch. There was a swing. Grandma used to push me on it. And he turned, looking toward the sugar house. That smell, that sweet smell. She used to let me taste the syrup right out of the pan. I felt something twist in my chest. Silas had been 5 when we left. I had assumed he remembered nothing. But here he was pulling fragments from the depths of memory, pieces of a life I had completely forgotten. Or maybe I had not forgotten. Maybe I had buried those memories so deep that even I could not find them anymore. Because remembering would have meant wanting. And wanting in the foster system was the most dangerous thing of all. "Come on," I said, my voice rough. "Let us go inside." The keys were in my pocket, included with the legal documents. I found the one that fit the front door. The lock was stiff, and I had to put my shoulder into it. It finally gave way with a grinding crack that echoed through the silence. The door swung open, a wave of stale, cold air. It smelled of dust, of mice, of time itself. And underneath all that, faintly, something floral. Lavender, maybe. I stepped inside. The foyer was dark. To my left, a living room. Furniture draped in white sheets like a congregation of ghosts. To my right, a staircase leading up into shadows. Straight ahead, a hallway leading deeper into the house. Silas pushed past me and headed straight for the stairs. I followed, curious about where his memory was leading him. On the second floor, we found 3 bedrooms. The master bedroom was small and neat, the bed made with a quilt that had faded from washing. On the nightstand, a photograph in a tarnished silver frame. 2 small boys grinning at the camera. One dark-haired, one fair. Me and Silas, maybe 7 and 4. I did not remember the picture being taken, but it was the second bedroom that stopped us both. 2 small beds, bunk beds actually, the kind you might find in any child's room. The walls were covered in crayon drawings, faded now, but still visible. Stick figures and trees and what might have been horses. A shelf held a collection of toy trucks and building blocks and a worn stuffed bear. This had been our room, mine and Silas's. This was where we had slept and played and dreamed before everything fell apart. Silas walked over to the shelf and picked up the stuffed bear. His hands trembled as he held it. "Mr. Buttons," he said, his voice barely audible. "I used to sleep with him every night. I had no memory of this room, no memory of those beds, those drawings, that bear. It had all been erased or buried so deep that I could not reach it. But Silas remembered. And watching him hold that ragged bear, I felt the first real crack in the walls I had built around my heart. Then Silas opened the closet door, looking for something else from his fractured memories. And that was when he found the box. A cardboard shoebox, battered and old, hidden behind a row of mothball-scented coats. "What is this?" he asked, pulling it out. I took it from him and lifted the lid. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Me and Silas as babies, as toddlers, as small children. Each one labeled in that familiar, spidery handwriting. Rowan's first steps, Silas's third birthday, the boys at the county fair. But it was the photos from later years that made my breath catch. These were not photos she had taken. These were school pictures, soccer team photos, newspaper clippings, a shot of me at what looked like a science fair holding a ribbon. Photographs that should not have existed in this house. She had been watching us. All those years, all those miles away. She had found ways to track our lives, to document our existence, to hold on to us even when she could not hold us. There were photos of Silas too, first day of middle school, a Christmas program where he stood in the back row wearing a paper crown, a candid shot that must have been taken from across the street. Silas walking with a foster family I did not recognize. "She never let go," I said. But even as I said it, the anger did not leave. It shifted. It became something more complicated. Because watching someone from a distance is not the same as being there. Collecting photographs is not the same as holding your grandson when he cries at night in a stranger's house. I put the box down. I could not look at it anymore. "Come on," I said, "let us check the sugar house." The sugar house was larger than it looked from the outside. The main door was a massive sliding panel of weathered wood that groaned as Guthrie helped us push it open. Inside it was dark and cold and smelled powerfully of maple syrup and wood smoke, a scent so sweet it was almost overwhelming. Light filtered through high dusty windows, illuminating a massive piece of equipment in the center of the space. Copper and steel tarnished with age, but still impressive. "That is the evaporator," Guthrie said. "This is where the sap gets boiled down into syrup. Your grandmother made some of the best syrup in the state with that thing." Silas wandered over to it, running his fingers along the metal. I watched him, noting the way his eyes moved, the way he was absorbing information like a sponge dropped in water. I started walking the length of the building, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. I was not sure what I was looking for. Some kind of sign, some kind of answer. And then I felt it. A floorboard. Looser than the others, a slight give under my left foot that the rest of the floor did not have. "Silas," I called. "There is something here." He hurried over as I knelt down and worked my fingers into the crack. The board came up with a squeal of old nails, and there in the dark space beneath was a metal box. It was an old Army surplus ammo can, painted black, with a heavy-duty padlock on the latch. Guthrie appeared beside us. He looked down at the bus and his weathered face showed no surprise. "She told me about this," he said quietly. "Made me promise not to tell anyone until you came, until you found it yourself." I looked at the padlock. "Do you have a key?" He shook his head. "But I have bolt cutters in the truck." 5 minutes later, the lock was cut and the lid was open. Silas and I knelt on the dusty floor of the sugar house, staring at the contents. Money. Stacks of it. Neat, tight bundles of $100 bills wrapped in rubber bands. And beneath the money letters, dozens of them tied together with blue ribbon. And on top of the stack, a large envelope with our names written on it. Rowan and Silas. The truth. I reached for the envelope. My hands were not quite steady. "How much money is that?" Silas whispered. I did a quick count. The stacks were thick. 68,000, maybe a little more. Enough to pay the taxes. Enough to keep the farm. Enough to fight. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single letter folded carefully. I began to read, my voice catching on the words. My dear boys, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it means you have come home. I have prayed for this day, I have dreamed of it, but I always knew I might not live to see it. I need you to know the truth. I need you to understand why I did what I did. I never abandoned you. I never stopped loving you. Every day since I sent you away, I have thought of you. I have watched over you as best I could. I have kept you in my heart, even when I could not keep you in my arms. When you were little, you lived here with me. This was your home. You played in this sugar house, helped me tap the trees, watch the sap boil. Rowan, you used to say the steam was dragon breath. Silas, you were afraid of the evaporator because it was so loud, but you loved tasting the fresh syrup. Then the bad men came, the developers, Ridgehaven. They wanted this land and they would swamp at nothing to get it. When I refused to sell, they started threatening me, and then they threatened you. I was faced with a choice: keep you with me where you would be targets, or send you somewhere safe, somewhere they could never find you. The foster care system is a terrible, impersonal thing. I know that, but it was the only place I could hide you. You became files, numbers, just two more children in a system full of children. You disappeared, and Ridgehaven could not touch you. I stopped reading. My throat had closed. I handed the letter to Silas, and he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I do not expect you to forgive me. What I did was unforgivable. I sent my grandsons into a cold, uncaring system, and I let them believe they had been abandoned. I chose their safety over their happiness. That is a debt I can never repay. But I want you to know that you were loved. You were always loved. And this farm, this land, it was always meant to be yours. The money in this box is enough to pay the taxes and keep the land. The choice of what to do with it is yours. You can sell to the developers. Take the money and walk away. Start fresh somewhere far from here. Or you can stay. You can fight. You can claim what is rightfully yours. Whatever you decide, know this: I am proud of you. Both of you. I have watched you grow into strong, brave young men, even under the most difficult circumstances. You are Aldrich's. This land is in your blood. You are in my heart always. Your grandmother, Vivian. Silas set the letter down. His face was wet. She loved us, he said. She really loved us. I sat there on that cold floor, and I waited for the anger to leave. I waited for the walls to come down. I waited for the flood of forgiveness that should have followed a letter like that. It did not come. What came instead was something harder, more honest. I believed she had loved us. I believed she had suffered, but I was not ready to forgive her. Not yet. Not because the letter was not enough, but because 10 years of pain do not dissolve in a single afternoon. They dissolve slowly, over time, like salt in cold water. You have to be patient with grief. You have to give it room to change shape. There were more letters in the box, and a flash drive, and a worn leather notebook filled with dates and names and evidence of crimes committed by men in expensive suits. But I did not read any more that day. I could not. What are we going to do? Silas asked. I looked at the money. $68,000. Enough to pay the taxes, enough to keep the land. I was not doing it for her. I was not doing it for the farm. I was not doing it because of love or legacy or any of the words she had written in that letter. I was doing it because of the boy sitting next to me. My brother, 15 years old, about to be shipped to California in 60 days. If I paid the taxes and kept the farm, we had an address. We had a home. We had something I could point to when I went to court and told a judge that I was capable of taking care of my brother. It was not forgiveness. It was not faith. It was mathematics. We pay the taxes, I said. We keep the farm. We stay. Silas looked at me, his eyes wide. Really, really. He threw his arms around me, and I held him. And I stared over his shoulder at the letter on the floor, at my grandmother's handwriting, at the words, "You are in my heart always." And I thought, I am not doing this for you, old woman. I am doing this for him. But even as I thought it, some small, quiet part of me wondered if that was the whole truth, Or if somewhere beneath the anger and the woes and the decade of hurt, a door had opened. Just a crack. Just enough to let in a sliver of light. We were home. Whether I was ready for that or not, we were home. The next morning, I drove into town in Guthrie's truck. He had lent it to me, waving off my protests. Your grandmother helped me rebuild my garage after the storm of 2018, he said. Would not take a dime for it. Said neighbors take care of each other. Well, you are my neighbor now, so take the truck. The county courthouse was in the next town over, a sturdy brick building that had probably looked exactly the same for 100 years. I walked in with $68,000 in a duffel bag, feeling like a character in a movie that nobody would believe. The tax clerk's office was a small room with too many filing cabinets and not enough light. A woman in her 50s sat behind the counter peering at me over her reading glasses. Can I help you? I am here to pay the back taxes on the Aldrich property. Sugar Maple Road, Ashford. She blinked at me. That property owes over $50,000. $52,000 and change. I unzipped the duffel bag. I would like to pay it in full. Cash. The look on her face was worth every one of those bills. An hour later, I walked out with a receipt. The property was ours, free and clear. No liens, no encumbrances, no impending seizure. The clock was no longer ticking. When I got back to the farm, Silas was waiting on the porch. It is done, I said. The taxes are paid. The farm is ours. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since yesterday. Then he grinned, the first real smile I had seen from him in months. So what do we do now? Now, I said. We figure out how to survive. The winter came hard and fast, as if it had been waiting for us. I had lived in Boston my whole life, so I thought I knew cold. I was wrong. New Hampshire cold was something different entirely. It seeped into your bones. It turned your breath into ice crystals. It made you understand viscerally why survival was never something to take for granted. Silas and I had no experience with this kind of weather. We had no experience with much of anything, really. In the foster system, you learn to survive. But survival in that world means navigating bureaucracy and avoiding trouble. It does not mean heating a farmhouse with a wood stove. It does not mean keeping pipes from freezing. It does not mean rationing supplies when the roads become impassable. We made mistakes, a lot of them. The first week we let the fire go out overnight, woke up to find frost on the inside of the windows, our breath visible in the air of our own bedroom. Silas could not stop shaking for hours. I held him under every blanket we had, and I cursed myself for being so stupid, for being so completely unprepared for the life I had chosen. The second week we ran out of firewood. I spent an entire day in the freezing cold with a dull axe splitting logs from a dead oak behind the sugar house. My hands blistered. My back screamed. I kept swinging because the alternative was letting my brother freeze. The third week, the pipes burst in the kitchen. Water everywhere. I stood in the flood, soaking wet, shivering, staring at the ceiling, and I thought about the $123,000 I could have had if I had sold the farm. Thought about a warm apartment in some city where the pipes were someone else's problem. But I did not call anyone, did not ask for help. I found a toolbox in the basement, found a video on my phone about pipe repair, fixed it myself, badly probably, but it held. That was the thing about me, the thing the foster system had built into my bones. I did not ask for help. I did not lean on anyone. I did not let anyone see me struggling, because in the system, struggling meant weakness, and weakness meant you got moved. You got separated. You got sent somewhere worse. So when Guthrie showed up with firewood, I tried to pay him. When Mabel brought food, I tried to refuse it. When an old farmer named Clem Hollister appeared at the door with his wife's stew and fresh-baked bread, I thanked him stiffly and closed the door as fast as I could. I did not want their charity. I did not want their pity. I did not want to owe anyone anything. But the cold does not care about pride, and neither does pneumonia. It started with a cough, dry and persistent, the kind that comes from too much cold air in young lungs. I thought it would pass. Silas was young, strong. He had survived worse than a New Hampshire winter. But by the end of the week, his fever was 103. He was having trouble breathing. His face was gray, and his eyes were glassy, and when I put my hand on his forehead, it felt like touching a stove. I panicked. We were 5 miles from town. The roads were icy. I had no car of my own. Guthrie had taken his truck to visit his sister in Vermont. For the first time since we arrived, I considered calling Mabel, considered asking for help, but I did not do it. Not yet. Instead, I carried my brother down the stairs, wrapped him in every blanket we owned, and put him in the passenger seat of the old farm truck that had been sitting in the barn under a tarp since before our grandmother died. The battery was dead. Of course it was. I stood in the freezing dark, my brother shivering beside me, and I felt the full weight of what I had done. I had brought us here. I had chosen this life. And now Silas was sick, and I could not even get him to a doctor. That was when I swallowed my pride and called Mabel. She was at our door within 40 minutes, driving a borrowed four-wheel drive that she handled like she had been doing it her whole life. She took one look at Silas, wrapped him in her own coat, and drove us both to the clinic in town without a single word of reproach. The doctor said it was pneumonia. If we had waited another day, it could have been much worse. They kept Silas overnight for observation. I sat in the chair beside his bed, watching him breathe, and I made deals with whatever was listening. Please, let him be okay. He is all I have. Mabel stayed with us the whole time. She brought soup from the diner and extra blankets from her own house. She sat with me in the waiting room when the doctors were examining Silas, and she did not ask questions or offer empty comfort. She just sat there, steady and quiet, and her presence was more reassuring than any words could have been. When Silas was finally released, Mabel drove us back to the farm, but instead of dropping us off, she parked the car and came inside. All right, she said, surveying the state of the house with the practiced eye of a woman who had survived 60 New Hampshire winters. Let me show you how this is supposed to work. For 3 hours, she gave us a crash course in rural survival. How to bank a fire so it lasts through the night. How to check the pipes for freezing. How to recognize the signs of carbon monoxide buildup. How to ration supplies and plan ahead for storms. She showed us the root cellar beneath the house, stocked with canned goods and preserves that our grandmother had put up before she died. She showed us the backup generator in the sugar house and taught us how to start it. She showed us the emergency supplies in the closet by the back door. Your grandmother was prepared, she said. She knew this land and she knew this weather. She left you everything you need to survive. You just have to learn how to use it. She stopped at the door before she left. You are not alone, Rowan. I know you want to be. I know it feels safer that way, but you are not. And pretending otherwise is going to get someone hurt. Then she was gone. I stood in the kitchen staring at the door, my jaw tight, because she was right. And I hated that she was right. And I hated even more that it had taken my brother nearly dying for me to admit it. One evening in late February, Clem Hollister sat with us on the porch, a mug of coffee warming his weathered hands. The cold had loosened its grip just enough for us to sit outside without losing feeling in our fingers. Your grandmother saved my son's life, he said quietly. Back in 2015, Tommy was in a bad accident, needed surgery we could not afford. Insurance would not cover it. We were going to lose him. His voice caught. He took a long drink of coffee. Vivian showed up at our door with $15,000 cash, said it was a loan, but she never asked for a dime of it back, never mentioned it again, just said neighbors take care of each other. Then he told me something I had not heard before. I almost sold, he said. His voice dropped. Ashamed. About 7 years back, Ridgehaven came to me with a number that made my head spin. My wife was sick. The medical bills were eating us alive. I was ready to sign. What stopped you? Clem looked out at the tree line. Your grandmother. She came to my house the night before I was supposed to sign, sat at my kitchen table and told me that if I sold, Ridgehaven would own every property between here and the ridge, that my land was the last piece standing between them and total control of this valley. She said she would help me find another way. Did she? She paid off my wife's hospital bills, $22,000, money she did not have to spare. She mortgaged her own equipment to do it. That is part of why the tax debt got so high. She was giving away everything she had to keep this community together. I sat with that for a long time after Clem left. My grandmother had not just been fighting for her own land. She had been fighting for everyone's. She had beggared herself to hold the line. She had gone broke protecting people who were not even her family. And then she had given up the only family she had to protect them from the consequences of her war. I was not ready to call it noble, not yet, But I was starting to understand that the story was more complicated than I had allowed myself to believe. The black Lexus appeared on a Tuesday in early March, nearly a year to the day since I had arrived. Silas and I were on the porch trying to figure out how to fix the sagging boards. When the car pulled up, I felt something tighten in my gut. Instinct. The same instinct that had kept me alive in foster homes where the wrong look could earn you a beating. Two men got out. The first was tall and thin, silver hair, the kind of suit that cost more than 6 months' rent. His smile was the kind that never reaches the eyes, the kind that men learn in boardrooms and practice in mirrors. The second was shorter, bulkier, built for intimidation, not conversation. Rowan Aldrich. The tall man climbed the porch steps, and this must be Silas. He extended a hand. I am Prescott Hale. I represent Ridge Haven Development Corporation. I did not shake his hand. I know who you are. His smile flickered. Then you know that we made a very generous offer for this property, an offer that is still on the table, I might add. The taxes have been paid. The offer is irrelevant. Hale's eyes narrowed. Yes, I heard about that. Quite resourceful. He glanced around the property, the shabby house, the weathered barn, the endless rows of bare maple trees. But I wonder if you fully understand what you are taking on here. This property requires constant maintenance. The sugaring operation alone demands expertise that takes years to develop. And then there are the ongoing expenses. Property taxes, insurance, equipment repairs. We will manage. He stepped closer. His cologne was expensive and overwhelming. I admire your determination, he said. I really do. It reminds me of your grandmother. She had that same stubborn streak. He paused and something cold flickered in his expression. But stubbornness has its limits. Your grandmother learned that, in the end, alone up here on this mountain, year after year, wearing herself down until there was nothing left. He let the words settle, like poison dripped into still water. Is that really the path you want to follow? Get off our property, Silas said. His voice was steady, but I could see his hands clenched at his sides. Hale turned his smile on my brother, the young one, so protective. He looked back at me. I will give you time to reconsider. Our offer will remain open for another 30 days. After that, he shrugged. We will have to explore other options. He started back toward the car, then paused at the bottom of the steps. Did not turn around. One more thing. This is a dangerous area. Remote, isolated. Accidents happen all the time on these mountain roads. House fires, equipment malfunctions. He turned his head just enough for me to see his profile. I would hate for anything unfortunate to happen to two young men so far from help. Then he got into the car and they drove away. Silas was shaking. I put my hand on his shoulder. They threatened us. He said it like he could not quite believe it. They just straight up threatened us. Yes. What are we going to do? I watched the black car disappear down the driveway, and something shifted inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. My grandmother had stood on this same porch and heard the same kind of words from the same kind of men. She had stood here alone. No one beside her, no one to put a hand on her shoulder. She had faced this by herself for years. I'm not going to say I understood her in that moment. Understanding takes longer than a single flash of recognition. But for the first time, I stopped seeing her as the woman who had thrown us away. And I started seeing her as the woman who had stood on this porch and chosen the hardest possible road because she believed it was the only one that kept her grandsons alive. We are going to do exactly what she did, I said. We are going to fight. Spring crept in slowly. The snow receded. The ground thawed. And with the warmer days and freezing nights came the telltale sign that Guthrie had been watching for. The sap started to run. The season starts when the days get warm, but the nights stay cold, he explained one February afternoon. We were in the sugar house examining the evaporator. That temperature swing is what makes the sap flow. Too warm at night, the sap stops. Too cold during the day, same thing. You have to watch the weather like a hawk. He showed us how to check the tubing system that connected the maple trees. Thousands of feet of plastic lines channeling sap down to collection tanks. He showed us how to test the sugar content and how to know when it was ready for boiling. He showed us the intricacies of the evaporator, the dangerous temperatures, the precise timing, It is an art, he said. Anyone can make syrup, but making great syrup, the kind your grandmother made, that takes years of practice. He looked at Silas. But you have time. Silas absorbed it all. He had always been a quick learner, curious and observant, and he took to maple sugaring like he had been born to it, which maybe he had. He spent hours in the sugar house studying our grandmother's journals, asking Guthrie endless questions. Watching him come alive like that, watching him find something that made his eyes light up for the first time in years, it was the first time since we arrived that I felt like we had made the right choice. Our first real batch was small, 38 gallons, nothing compared to what our grandmother had produced. But Silas held up the first finished bottle, amber liquid, catching the light, and he grinned. It is not much, he said. It is everything, I told him. It is a start. The peace did not last. It was a night in early April. The sap was running strong. Silas and I had been up late boiling a fresh batch. The sugar house was filled with sweet-smelling steam. We were exhausted and sticky, and happier than we had been in months. I woke to the sound of breaking glass. I was on my feet before I was fully conscious, my heart hammering. The sound had come from the sugar house. Stay here, I told Silas, who was already sitting up in bed, eyes wide. But he did not stay. Of course he did not. He followed me down the stairs and out into the cold night air. The door of the sugar house was hanging open. Inside, I could see shapes moving in the darkness. I heard liquid splashing, smelled something chemical and acrid. Then I saw the writing on the wall, spray painted in red, dripping like blood. Last warning. I ran toward the building shouting, and the shapes fled. I heard an engine start somewhere down the driveway, saw headlights flash between the trees. By the time I reached the road, they were gone. But the damage was done. They had poured something, motor oil or industrial solvent, into our collection tanks. Thousands of gallons of sap ruined. Weeks of work destroyed. Our first real season, the season that was supposed to prove we could do this, wiped out in a single night of violence. Silas stood in the doorway of the sugar house, his face white in the moonlight. They are not going to stop, he said. His voice was barely a whisper. They are never going to stop. I wanted to tell him it would be okay. I wanted to promise him that we were safe, that justice would prevail, that the good guys always win in the end. But I had spent 18 years learning that the world does not work that way. I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff. Harlan Pruitt was a big man in his late 50s, weathered face, eyes that had seen too much. He arrived within 20 minutes, his deputy trailing behind. He surveyed the damage in silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy. I am sorry. I am truly sorry. Do you know who did this? He did not answer directly. Just looked at the spray-painted warning on the wall. Your grandmother came to me years ago, told me what Ridgehaven was doing to her, the threats, the harassment. She begged me to help. His jaw tightened. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But they have lawyers, Rowan. They have money and connections. Everything I tried, they blocked. Every witness recanted. Every piece of evidence disappeared. So you did nothing. He met my eyes. I did what I could, which was not enough. I know that. I have lived with that guilt for years. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Sealed, my grandmother's handwriting on the front. She gave me this, he said, right before she died. Asked me to keep it safe until you came home. I opened it. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note. For Rowan and Silas, the evidence I gathered, copies of everything. Use it wisely. She knew, I said slowly. She knew this day would come. Your grandmother was the smartest woman I ever knew, Pruitt said, and the bravest. She spent years documenting everything Ridgehaven did, every threat, every act of sabotage, every family they forced off their land. He nodded toward the flash drive. That is her legacy, her weapon, the one she could never use because she was alone. I stood there in the ruined sugar house, smelling chemicals, looking at the red paint dripping down the wall, and I made a decision. Not because anyone told me to, not because the community rallied around me, not because of some noble idea about justice. I looked at Silas standing in the doorway, his face pale, his hands trembling, and I thought about a 15-year-old boy who had just started to believe that this could be home, who had just started to come alive after years of going through the motions. who had held up a bottle of maple syrup like it was made of gold. I was not going to let them take that from him. I called Lenore Beckett the next day, a legal aid lawyer who specialized in cases against predatory developers. She was in her mid-40s, tough, sharp, the kind of woman who walked into a fight with her eyes open and her fists ready. "This is exactly what we have been looking for," she said after reviewing the flash drive in our grandmother's notebook. "Ridgehaven has been operating like this for years, but no one has ever been able to build a comprehensive case against them. Until now." It was a week after the vandalism. Silas and I were cleaning out the attic, looking for old equipment we could salvage. The space was cramped and dusty, full of boxes and forgotten furniture. Silas was moving an old trunk when his elbow knocked against a loose board in the ceiling. The board fell, and with it came a small metal tin, rusted with age. He caught it before it hit the floor. "What is that?" I asked, climbing over a stack of old magazines. Silas pried open the lid, and then he went very still. Inside were letters, hundreds of them, maybe more than 500, tied in bundles with faded ribbon, each one addressed to us in our grandmother's handwriting, each one dated, week by week, for a decade, Rowan Silas said. His voice cracked. "Look at these dates." I took one of the bundles. The first letter was dated the week after we were taken away. The last was dated 2 days before she died. "Every week," I said. "She wrote to us every single week." We sat on the dusty attic floor surrounded by a decade of words she could never say out loud. And we read them, one by one. She told us about maple seasons, about harsh winters, about the loneliness that sometimes felt like drowning. She told us about her battles with Ridgehaven, about the small joys she found, birds at the feeder, the first crocuses of spring. She told us about watching us from a distance, standing outside our schools, too afraid to approach, hiring a private investigator to find out where we were living, crying herself to sleep after seeing photographs of us growing up without her. And in every letter, in her own way, she told us she loved us. "I think of you every day. I hope you know that somewhere someone loves you more than life itself. You are in my heart always, even when I cannot be with you, until we meet again. Know that you are loved. Know that you have always been loved." 500 letters, a decade of silence made visible, piling up in a tin box in an attic waiting for grandsons who might never come home. Silas was crying so hard he could barely breathe. I held him, and I wanted to cry too. But the tears would not come. Not yet. Because something else was happening. Something harder. The walls were cracking. That same week the second blow fell. A white sedan pulled up the driveway on a Thursday morning. A woman in a gray pantsuit got out carrying a clipboard. I knew what she was before she opened her mouth. You learn to recognize social workers the way animals learn to recognize predators. By the way they move. By the way they look at everything and write things down. "Mr. Aldrich," she said, "I am from the Department of Children and Family Services. I am here regarding your brother Silas." My stomach dropped. "Silas is fine. He is safe. He is in school." She nodded, but she did not put down her clipboard. "Mr. Aldrich, your brother is a minor who is currently listed as a runaway from a state-supervised group home. You have no legal guardianship, no foster care license, no court order permitting his placement with you. Under state law, he cannot remain here." I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. He is my brother. I understand that. But the law is very clear. Without legal guardianship, Silas must be returned to state custody. The family in California is still willing to proceed with adoption. She looked at her clipboard. "I have been authorized to arrange his transport within 48 hours. 48 hours. She might as well have said 48 seconds. The world narrowed to a single point. My brother. My 15-year-old brother. Being dragged out of the first real home he had known since he was 5 years old. Silas had come out onto the porch. He had heard everything. His face was white. His hands were gripping the railing so hard his knuckles had gone bloodless. "I am not going," he said. His voice was thin but fierce. "I am not leaving." The social worker looked at him with an expression that was not unkind, but was utterly immovable. The expression of a person who had learned to separate their feelings from their job. "I understand this is difficult," she said, "but I have a legal obligation." I stepped between her and the porch. "I am going to need those 48 hours." She studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded. 48 hours, Mr. Aldrich. After that, I will return with a court order. She got in her car and drove away. And I stood in the driveway and I felt something I had not felt since I was 8 years old, standing in a different driveway, watching a different car take my brother away from me. Terror. I called Lenore Beckett. She answered on the second ring. I need an emergency motion, I said. Temporary guardianship. Can you do it? She was quiet for 3 seconds, which was a long time for a woman like Lenore. I can try, she said, but I need character witnesses. I need proof of stable housing. I need evidence that you can provide for him, and I need it by tomorrow morning. I hung up the phone, and for the first time since we arrived in Ashford, I asked for help. Not because I wanted to, because I had no choice. I called Mabel, I called Guthrie, I called Clem, I called Sheriff Pruitt, I called every person in that town whose name I knew, and every single one of them said the same thing. What do you need? By the next morning, Lenore had a stack of affidavits. Mabel testified to our living conditions and her willingness to serve as an emergency contact. Guthrie testified to the viability of the farm as a source of income. Clem testified to our character and our integration into the community. Sheriff Pruitt testified that the property was safe and that he would personally ensure our welfare. The judge granted a temporary stay. Silas could remain at the farm pending a full guardianship hearing, which would happen after the Ridgehaven case was resolved. That night, Silas sat on the porch steps, his knees pulled up to his chest, staring at nothing. What if it does not work, he said. What if the judge says no? What if they still send me to California? They will not. You do not know that. I sat down beside him. No, I said, I do not, but I know this. I will fight for you until there is nothing left of me. I will burn down every courthouse in this state before I let them take you away from me again. He almost smiled. That is probably illegal. Probably. He leaned against my shoulder, and we sat there in the cold, watching our breath form clouds in the dark. That night, after Silas was asleep, I went up to the attic alone. I sat on the floor with a lantern, and I read more of my grandmother's letters. I read for hours, letter after letter, year after year, her handwriting growing shakier as she aged, her sentences growing shorter, but the love never fading, never dimming, never becoming less than what it was. And then I found the one that broke me. It was dated 6 years ago, the year I turned 12. The year I ran away from my third foster home and spent 2 nights sleeping under a bridge before the police found me. My dearest Rowan, I learned today that you ran away. My investigator told me they found you under a bridge in Dorchester. You were cold and hungry and alone. I sat in the sugar house after I heard. I sat there for a long time. I thought about getting in my truck and driving to Boston and finding you and bringing you home. I thought about it so hard that I actually put on my coat and picked up my keys. But I did not go, because they are still watching. Ridgehaven has people everywhere. If I go to you, they will find you. And if they find you, they will use you against me. Or worse. So I put down my keys. I took off my coat. I went back to the sugar house. And I wrote this letter that I will never send to a grandson I cannot hold. Today I stood outside your school. I watched you come out the front door. You are so tall now. You walk with your shoulders hunched, like you are trying to make yourself smaller. Like you are trying to disappear. I wanted to run to you. I wanted to hold you and tell you that you are not alone, that someone loves you, that someone has always loved you. But I could not, so I am writing it here. In this letter that will go into a box in an attic with all the others. I love you, Rowan. I love you more than you will ever know. And I am so sorry. I am so sorry for what I have done to you, for what I have taken from you, for the childhood I stole. Please forgive me, even though I do not deserve it. Your grandmother. I sat there on the attic floor and the walls came down. Not slowly, not gradually, not brick by brick. They came down all at once, like a dam breaking, like a levee giving way. Everything I had held back for 10 years came flooding through. The anger, the grief, the loneliness, the desperate, starving need to be loved. All of it, pouring out of me in waves that shook my whole body. She had been there. She had been standing outside my school. She had watched me walk out the door with my shoulders hunched, and she had wanted to run to me, and she had not, because running to me might have killed me. She had chosen to stand there, in the cold, watching her grandson walk away from her. And then she had gone home and written a letter that she put in a box in an attic because even writing his name on an envelope and putting it in the mail might have been enough for them to find him. That was not abandonment. That was not choosing land over blood. That was a woman standing in the deepest kind of hell and choosing to stay there because leaving would have made it worse for the people she loved. I cried. For the first time in years, I cried. Ugly, broken, heaving sobs that I could not control and did not try to. I cried for the boy under the bridge. I cried for the old woman standing outside the school. I cried for 10 years of silence and 500 letters that never got sent. And somewhere in the middle of all that grief, I forgave her. Not because the letter made it easy, not because the pain suddenly disappeared, but because I finally understood that she had been carrying a weight that was heavier than mine. She had been carrying the knowledge that she had hurt the people she loved most in the world, and she had been carrying it alone every day for 10 years, without complaint, without asking for forgiveness, without even being able to tell them why. I sat in that attic until the lantern burned low, and when I finally went downstairs, I stopped at the door of our old bedroom. Silas was asleep in the bottom bunk, Mr. Buttons tucked under his arm. I stood there, and I looked at my brother, and I made a promise. Not to him, not to my grandmother, to myself. We are going to finish this. We are going to finish what she started. And then we are going to live, really live, in the home she kept safe for us. I went to bed, and for the first time since we arrived in Ashford, I slept through the night, deep and dreamless. The sleep of a man who has finally set down a weight he has been carrying for far too long. The next few weeks, I did something I had never done before in my life. I knocked on doors, and not to ask for handouts, not to beg for sympathy, but to look people in the eye and ask them to do the hardest thing a person can do. Tell the truth about the people who had hurt them. Lenore Beckett had given me a list. 14 families in the county who had sold their land to Ridgehaven over the past 12 years. Some had moved away. Some were still here living in smaller houses, on smaller lots, working jobs that paid less than the land they had lost. All of them had a story. And according to my grandmother's notebook, most of those stories involved threats, intimidation, or outright fraud. I started with the ones who were still local. The first door I knocked on belonged to a man named Douglas Enfield. He had sold his family's dairy farm to Ridgehaven 8 years ago, 40 acres that had been in his family for 3 generations. My grandmother's notebook said he had sold under duress after someone slashed the tires on his equipment and left a dead animal on his porch. He opened the door and looked at me with the flat, suspicious eyes of a man who had learned not to trust strangers. I told him who I was. I told him about the farm. I told him about the evidence my grandmother had collected. And I told him that I was building a case against Ridgehaven. He listened without expression. When I finished, he shook his head. "I am sorry about your grandmother," he said. "She was a good woman. But I signed those papers. I took their money. There is nothing a court can do about that now. You signed under duress," I said. "That is not a legal sale. That is extortion." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that I carried with me for the rest of that week. "Son, you do not understand what it is like to be afraid every single day. To lie in bed at night wondering if tonight is the night they come back. I have a wife. I have children. I sold because I wanted my family to be safe, and I would do it again." I left his house with nothing. No testimony, no affidavit, nothing but the sound of a deadbolt turning behind me and the understanding that fear, real fear, the kind that lives in your bones and rewires the way you think, does not go away just because someone shows up on your porch with good intentions. I sat in the truck for 20 minutes before I could drive to the next house. The second door was worse. A woman named Patricia Voss, whose husband had died of a heart attack 6 months after Ridgehaven pressured them to sell. She listened to my pitch. Then she told me to get off her property and never come back. The third door, the fourth, the fifth, every one of them the same. Fear or anger or both. Nobody wanted to relive what had happened. Nobody wanted to put their name on a piece of paper and go up against a corporation with more money than God. By the end of the week, I had spoken to 9 families. I had 0 witnesses. I sat in Guthrie's truck in the parking lot of the hardware store, and I stared at the steering wheel, and I thought about quitting, about taking the Ridgehaven offer and walking away, about cutting my losses and protecting what little I had left. Then my phone rang. It was Clem Hollister. "I heard what you have been doing," he said, "going door to door, asking people to stand up." "Yes." "How many have said yes?" "None." He was quiet for a beat. Then he said, "I will testify." "You do not have to do that, Clem." "I know I do not have to. But your grandmother paid $22,000 to save my son's life. She never asked me for anything in return. Not one thing. In 30 years of knowing that woman, she never once asked me for a favor." He paused. "Well, now she is asking. Through you. And I am not going to say no." That was the first crack. The second came 2 days later. Douglas Enfield called me back. His voice was different, harder, more certain. "My daughter found out what Ridgehaven did to us," he said. "She has been reading about them online. She told me that if I do not testify, she will never forgive me. She said her grandfather would be ashamed." He took a breath. "She is right. He would be ashamed. So yes, I will do it. Tell your lawyer to send me whatever I need to sign." After Enfield, 3 more families came forward. Then 2 more. The fear was still there. But something was stronger than the fear now. The same thing that had kept my grandmother fighting for a decade. The stubborn, unreasonable belief that the truth matters, even when it is dangerous, even when it costs you. By the time Lenore filed the case, she had testimony from 7 families, documented evidence spanning 10 years, financial records, photographs, and my grandmother's leather notebook filled with the meticulous observations of a woman who had spent the last decade of her life building a weapon she knew she might never get to use. Then Ridgehaven made their move. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, hand-delivered by a courier in a black town car. I signed for it on the porch and opened it standing up because some part of me already knew what it was going to say. It was an offer, not for the land, for me. $300,000. Deposited into any account I named, plus a written guarantee from Ridgehaven's legal team that they would support my guardianship petition for Silas. No more social workers, no more California, no more 48-hour deadlines. Just sign over the property, drop the lawsuit, walk away. I read it 3 times. $300,000. That was more money than I had ever imagined. More money than I had ever seen. It was a house, a college fund for Silas, a cushion against every catastrophe that life might throw at us. It was security, the one thing I had never had, not once in 18 years. And the guardianship guarantee. That was the real knife, because they knew. They knew that Silas was my weakness. They knew that I would burn down the world to keep him. And they were offering me the one thing I could not give him on my own. Legal certainty, a judge's signature, the promise that no social worker would ever knock on our door again. I read the letter a 4th time, a 5th. Each time the numbers got larger and the logic got harder to argue with. And all it would cost was the land my grandmother had died to protect, the community she had beggared herself to defend, the truth she had spent a decade documenting in a leather notebook that she hid under the floorboards of her sugar house because she believed that someday someone would come along who was brave enough to use it. I did not answer the letter that day or the next. On the 3rd night, I was sitting on the porch in the dark. The stars were out thick and bright in a way that city skies never allow. The air smelled like thawing earth and maple sap and wood smoke. From somewhere deep in the forest, an owl was calling. I heard the screen door open behind me. Silas came out and sat down on the step beside me. "You have been quiet for 3 days," he said. "What is going on?" I handed him the letter. He read it by the light from the kitchen window. His face changed as he read. I watched the emotions move through him. Surprise, calculation, and then something else. Something that looked like his grandmother. 300,000, he said. "Yes, and they will help with the guardianship. That is what they say." He was quiet for a long time, longer than I expected from a 15-year-old. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I do not know. What do you think I should do?" He looked at me, and in that moment he looked so much older than 15. He looked like a person who had already lived several lifetimes, who had already been broken and rebuilt so many times that the seams did not show anymore. I think he said slowly that Grandma could have sold this farm anytime she wanted, any day for 10 years. She could have taken the money and moved somewhere warm and lived out her life in peace. She would have had enough, more than enough, yes. But she did not sell. She stayed. She fought. She wrote 500 letters to grandsons she could not see, and she hid money under the floorboards. And she documented every single thing those people did because she believed that someday it would matter. He looked out at the darkness, at the maple trees standing like sentinels on the hillside, at the sugar house where our grandmother had spent her last years alone, keeping the faith. If we take the money, he said, then none of it mattered. All those years, all those letters, all that pain, it was all for nothing. She died for nothing. He turned back to me. I do not want to go to California. I do not want $300,000. I want to live on this farm and make maple syrup and finish what she started. That is what I want. I looked at my brother, this boy who had run away from a group home and hitchhiked across New Hampshire in the middle of March because he refused to let the system separate us again. This boy who remembered a stuffed bear named Mr. Buttons and the taste of fresh syrup and the sound of his grandmother's voice. He was braver than me. He had always been braver than me. Okay, I said, we stay, we fight. He nodded. Then he leaned against my shoulder, the way he used to when he was small, before the system taught him that leaning on people was weakness. Rowan, yeah, thank you for coming to find me, for not giving up. I put my arm around him. That was never an option, I said. We sat there until the stars wheeled overhead, and the owl stopped calling, and the first gray light of dawn began to seep into the eastern sky. The hearing was set for July, a Wednesday, the kind of perfect summer day that makes you believe the world is fundamentally good even when you know better. The county courthouse was the same sturdy brick building where I had paid the taxes 6 months earlier. But today it was different. Today the parking lot was full. Today there were people on the steps. Today the hallway outside the courtroom was packed with faces I recognized. Mabel was there, her silver hair freshly washed, wearing a dress I had never seen her in before. Guthrie stood beside her, looking uncomfortable in a collared shirt. Clem Hollister had brought his wife and his son Tommy, the one my grandmother had saved. Sheriff Harlan Pruitt was in uniform, standing against the back wall with his arms crossed and his jaw set. And behind them, filling the benches, were the people of Ashford. The woman from the hardware store, the man who ran the gas station, the couple who owned the bed and breakfast on the edge of town. People who had known my grandmother. People who had watched her fight. People who had come to see her grandsons finish what she started. Across the aisle sat Prescott Hale and 3 other lawyers in suits that probably cost more than every vehicle in the courthouse parking lot combined. They looked confident, relaxed, like men who had played this game before and always won. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Silas on one side and Lenore Beckett on the other. My hands were steady. My heart was not. The judge entered. Cordelia Graves, a woman in her mid-60s with steel gray hair and the kind of face that suggested she had spent her entire career being underestimated and had long since stopped caring. She had a reputation for fairness and a low tolerance for lawyers who thought money was a substitute for truth. Let us begin, she said. The next 3 hours were the longest of my life. Lenore laid out our case systematically. She started with the history, 12 years of Ridgehaven acquisitions in the county. She showed maps, before and after, green parcels turning red one by one as families sold, only a few holdouts remaining. My grandmother's land, the largest and most strategically important, stubbornly green in a sea of red. Then she brought in the testimony. Clem Hollister went first. He told the court about the threats he had received, about the night someone left a burning tire on his front lawn, about the $15,000 my grandmother had given him for his son's surgery. His voice was steady and clear, and when he was done, the courtroom was silent. Douglas Enfield went next. He described the systematic intimidation that had forced him to sell, the slashed tires, the dead animal on his porch, the phone calls in the middle of the night. His voice broke once. He stopped, took a breath, looked at me across the courtroom. Then he straightened his shoulders and kept going. And when he finished, the silence in the room was the kind that has weight, the kind you can feel pressing against your chest. 3 more families testified, each story different in its details, each story the same in its shape: pressure, threats, isolation, surrender. And then Lenore played the evidence from the flash drive. Audio recordings my grandmother had made, photographs with timestamps, financial records that traced payments from Ridgehaven to local officials, a paper trail that stretched back a decade assembled by a woman who had known that she might not live to use it, but had built it anyway, because someone had to. Hale's legal team countered at every turn. They challenged the authenticity of the recordings. They questioned the credibility of the witnesses. They painted my grandmother as a paranoid recluse who had invented conspiracies to explain her own inability to manage a failing farm. It was a good strategy, polished, professional, the kind of defense that money buys. And then they played their final card. Prescott Hale stood, buttoned his jacket, addressed the court with the smooth confidence of a man who had rehearsed this moment. Your Honor, we have evidence that Vivian Aldrich signed a binding agreement in 2019 granting Ridgehaven Development a permanent easement across her property. This agreement provides my client with legal right-of-way access that the plaintiffs are now attempting to block in bad faith. He produced a document, official letterhead, legal language, and at the bottom a signature that I recognized. My grandmother's handwriting, spidery and elegant. The same hand that had written 500 letters and addressed them to grandsons she could not see. Silas grabbed my arm under the table. His fingers were ice cold. That is not possible, he whispered. She would never have agreed to that. I know, I said. Watch. Lenore examined the document carefully. She took her time. She did not rush, she did not panic. And when she looked up, she was smiling. May I approach the bench, she said. Judge Graves nodded. Your Honor, Lenore said. Her voice was calm and measured. This document is a forgery, and I can prove it. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out the leather notebook, my grandmother's journal, the weapon she had spent a decade building. Vivian Aldrich was meticulous, Lenore said. She documented everything, including every piece of paper that passed through her hands. And in this journal, she has a specific notation about this exact document. She opened to a marked page, September 2019. Ridgehaven presented me with a document claiming I had agreed to grant them easement rights. I have never seen this document before. I never signed it. The signature appears to be copied from my insurance application. I have documented this forgery and will include it in my evidence file. Lenore produced another document, a copy of my grandmother's insurance application from 2019. The signature clearly visible. As you can see, Your Honor, the signatures are not merely similar. They are identical, because one was traced from the other. She paused, letting the courtroom absorb that. Furthermore, Vivian Aldrich had this analyzed by a forensic handwriting expert before her death. I have the expert's sworn statement here. She held up a sealed affidavit. The expert concluded with 98% certainty that the signature on the easement document was mechanically reproduced from the insurance application. The courtroom erupted, voices, movement. Hale's co-counsel leaned in, whispering urgently. Hale himself stood very still. His face had gone the color of old paper. Judge Graves banged her gavel twice. Order, she said. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. She looked at Hale. Her expression was not angry. It was worse than angry. It was contemptuous. This is a very serious allegation, Mr. Hale. If what counsel is claiming is true, it constitutes fraud and forgery, submitted to this court as evidence. Under oath. Your Honor, Hale began. We need time to investigate these allegations. We request a continuance. Denied. Judge Graves did not raise her voice. She did not need to. You have had months to prepare your case. You submitted this document as evidence. If it is fraudulent, that is your responsibility. Not this court's problem. She turned to Lenore. Ms. Beckett, I am going to recommend that the State Attorney General open a formal criminal investigation into Ridgehaven Development Corporation and its activities in this county. In the meantime, all claims made by Ridgehaven against the Aldrich property are dismissed, with prejudice. She looked at Hale one more time. And Mr. Hale, I strongly suggest you retain personal counsel. You are going to need it. She banged her gavel. Court is adjourned. The aftermath was chaos. Reporters from 3 counties descended on the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed. Microphones were thrust forward. Voices shouted questions that blurred into a wall of sound. Hale and his team pushed through the crowd without comment, their faces tight, their eyes straight ahead. The confident men in expensive suits who had walked into the courtroom that morning looking like they owned the world were now walking out, looking like the world was about to collapse on their heads. I barely noticed any of it. I was looking at Silas, who was standing on the courthouse steps with tears running down his face and a smile so wide it looked like it might break him in half. I was looking at Mabel, who had her hands clasped over her heart and was crying without making a sound. I was looking at Guthrie, who nodded at me once, just once. And in that single nod was everything he had never been able to say about the woman he had known for 30 years. The woman who had fought alone and died alone and left her weapon buried under the floorboards for the grandson she believed would come. We had won. Not completely, not finally. The investigation would take months. The trials would take longer. But we had won this battle. The one that mattered. The one my grandmother had spent a decade preparing for. The truth had come out. In a courtroom. Under oath. In front of a judge who could not be bought. In a community that was finally ready to stand up. Clem Hollister found me in the crowd. He put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed. She would be proud, he said. My God, she would be proud. The investigation took 9 months. The state attorney general assigned a team of prosecutors who treated Ridgehaven like what it was. A criminal enterprise operating under corporate cover. Prescott Hale was arrested in October, charged with fraud forgery, witness intimidation and conspiracy. He was denied bail after prosecutors argued he was a flight risk. The same man who had stood on my porch in a suit that cost more than my grandmother's annual income was now sitting in a county jail waiting for trial. Several other Ridgehaven executives were indicted. Their financial records revealed a pattern of corruption that extended far beyond our county. Land fraud in 3 states, bribery of local officials, environmental violations. The company's assets were frozen, their projects halted. The empire that had terrorized a community for over a decade was crumbling. The families who had been forced to sell began to come forward, not just the 7 who had testified. Others, from neighboring towns, from neighboring counties. Lawsuits were filed. Settlements were negotiated. Some families got their land back. Others received compensation that would never be enough, but was better than nothing. Douglas Enfield called me the day his settlement came through. He did not say much, just thank you. And then your grandmother would have liked this. That was enough. None of them got back the years they had lost, but they got something, justice, or the closest thing to it that the law can provide. And in Ashford, life went on. Lenore Beckett handled my guardianship petition. With the Ridgehaven case resolved, with the farm established as a viable home, with a stack of character references from half the town, the judge approved it in November. 6 months after we arrived. When the final documents came through, I held the paper in my hands for a long time before I showed Silas. I read every word, every clause, every legal formality, because I needed to be sure. I needed to know that this was real, that no one could come along tomorrow and take it away. It was real. Silas and I sat on the porch of the farmhouse, the same porch where Hale had stood and threatened us. The same porch where our grandmother had stood for a decade alone, refusing to break. We are official, Silas said. He was holding the court order like it was made of glass. You are stuck with me. I could think of worse fates. He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the maple trees. Their leaves had turned, gold and amber and deep burning red. Do you think she knows, he said? Do you think she can see us? I looked at the trees, at the land, at the sugar house where the evaporator waited for another season, at the hills rolling away into the distance covered in forest that had been here before us and would be here after. I think she is here, I said, in the trees, in the land, in us. It has been 3 years since that day at the courthouse. 3 years since Silas and I claimed our inheritance and started our new life on Sugar Maple Road. The farm is thriving now. We expanded the sugaring operation, updated the equipment, hired seasonal help during the busy months. Silas designed a label himself, Aldrich Family Maple, since 1952. Last year we won a blue ribbon at the state fair. My grandmother won the same ribbon 11 times. We have a long way to go to catch up. Silas is 18 now, the same age I was when this all began. He graduated from the local high school last spring valedictorian, and this fall he is starting at the state university. Environmental science, maybe forestry. He wants to understand the land the way our grandmother did. Not just how to work it, but how to protect it. I am still here, on the farm, where I belong. I wake up at 5 every morning. I check the weather. I walk the grove. I inspect the tubing. I maintain the evaporator. I do the books. I negotiate with distributors who try to lowball me, and I smile when I catch myself sounding exactly like the woman whose stubbornness I spent a decade resenting. I never thought I would be a farmer. Never imagined I would spend my days tapping trees and boiling sap and watching the seasons change on a piece of land that has been in my family for 70 years. But there is a peace in it that I never found anywhere else. A sense of purpose, of belonging, of being exactly where I am supposed to be. The community that embraced us that first winter has become our family. Mabel still insists we come to the diner for Sunday dinner. She has gotten older, slower, but her eyes are still sharp and her coffee is still strong, and she still tells stories about my grandmother that make me laugh and cry in the same breath. Guthrie stops by every week to check on the evaporator and share advice that I pretend I do not need. Clem's wife still brings casseroles even though Silas has become a better cook than any of us expected. I got a letter from Prescott Hale's lawyer last year. Hale was convicted on all counts, sentenced to 12 years. His lawyer wanted to know if I would consider a victim impact statement for the appeal. I did not respond. I had nothing to say to that man, nothing that a courtroom needed to hear. The sentence was enough. The truth was enough. My grandmother's notebook sitting in an evidence locker somewhere, a weapon finally used, was enough. There is a small cemetery at the edge of town. Old stones leaning at angles, iron fences green with oxidation. An oak tree massive and ancient, spreading its branches over the graves like a guardian. My grandmother's stone is underneath that tree. Simple, unadorned, the way she would have wanted it. Vivian Aldrich, beloved grandmother, 1948 to 2024. We go there every spring, right when the sap starts to run, right when the sugar house fills with steam and the air turns sweet. This year, Silas brought the first bottle of the season. He placed it at the base of the stone, careful like he was setting down something precious. "We did it, Grandma," he said. "Another good year. The trees are healthy. The equipment is running clean." Guthrie says the sugar content is the best he has seen in a decade. He paused, touched the stone. "I am going to college next month. Environmental science, like I told you. I am going to learn everything I can about these forests, about this land, about how to take care of it the way you did." His voice caught. "I wish you could see it. I wish you could see what we built." I knelt beside him. The grass was damp. The oak leaves rustled overhead. "I know you can hear me," I said, "because I talk to you every morning when I walk through the grove. I tell you about the farm, about Silas, about the life we have built on the land you saved." I paused. "I forgave you a long time ago. You know that. But I want to say something I have never said before. Thank you. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for writing 500 letters that you knew we might never read. Thank you for standing outside my school in the cold because you could not bear to go a whole year without seeing my face. Thank you for hiding money under the floorboards, and evidence on flash drives, and love in every corner of this place. Thank you for choosing the hardest road, for carrying a weight that no one should have to carry alone, for loving us so much that you were willing to let us hate you if it meant we would be safe." The wind moved through the oak tree. The leaves whispered. And for a moment, just a moment, I could smell maple syrup, warm and sweet. The way the sugar house smells when the evaporator is running and the steam is rising and everything in the world is exactly as it should be. "You were right about the maple trees," I said. "You told Silas once that they teach you patience, that you have to wait for the right conditions, the right moment, that you cannot rush it. You can only prepare and trust and wait." We waited a decade, Grandma. A decade of cold and loneliness and anger. A decade of not understanding. But when the time was right, everything flowed. We found our way back to each other. We found our way back to the land. We found our way back to you. Silas took my hand, the way he used to when he was small, before the system taught us not to reach for each other. "We are home now," he said. "We are finally home." I squeezed his hand. And we stayed there for a long time. Two brothers kneeling at the grave of the woman who had saved them. The sun climbed higher, the birds sang, and somewhere in the distance the maple trees stood tall and patient, their branches heavy with the first buds of spring, waiting for another season to begin. Sometimes in the early morning before the sun clears the ridge, I walk through the maple grove alone. The trees are old, also young. Some of them were here when my grandfather cleared this land in 1952. They have survived ice storms and droughts and the slow, relentless pressure of men who wanted to cut them down and build something shiny in their place. They are still here. They will be here long after I am gone. I walk among them and I think about inheritance. Not money, not land, not legal documents filed in county courthouses. The real inheritance. The one that cannot be measured or taxed or stolen by men in expensive suits. My grandmother left me a farm, but that is not what she really left me. She left me the knowledge that I was loved, even when I could not feel it, even when I did not believe it, even when I had built walls so thick that no light could get through. She left me 500 letters that said the same thing in 500 different ways. You are not alone. You have never been alone. Someone is thinking of you right now at this very moment, and she loves you more than you will ever know. She left me a brother. Because without the farm, without the inheritance, without the reason to come to Ashford, I would have lost Silas to California. He would have become a stranger. A name on a Christmas card. A face I saw once a year if I was lucky. She gave me back the only family I had left, and she left me this land. Not as a burden, not as a trap, but as a place to stand, a place to belong, a place where the trees know your name, and the soil remembers your footprints, and the sugar house still smells like the steam your grandmother called dragon breath when you were too young to know any better. That is the inheritance of Sugar Maple Road. Not property, not money, love. The fierce, stubborn, sacrificial love of a woman who gave up everything so that her grandsons could have a chance. The quiet, persistent love that survived a decade of separation and silence. The redemptive love that brought two broken brothers home. I used to think that home was a place you earned, a place you had to deserve. A place that could be taken away from you if you were not good enough or strong enough or lucky enough to hold on to it. I was wrong. Home is not a place you earn. Home is a place that waits for you, patiently, stubbornly, the way a grandmother waits for grandsons she cannot see, the way maple trees wait for spring, the way love waits for the walls to come down. My walls are down now. They have been down for years. And what I found on the other side was not weakness. It was not vulnerability. It was not the danger I had always feared. What I found was Silas sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee watching the sun come up. What I found was Mabel sliding a plate of meatloaf across a counter and telling me to eat. What I found was Guthrie leaning against the evaporator, showing me how to read the temperature gauge with the patience of a man who has all the time in the world. What I found was my grandmother's handwriting on a yellowed envelope, telling me that I was loved, that I had always been loved, that I would always be loved. That is what home is. Not a building, not an address, not even a family. Home is the moment you stop running, the moment you let yourself be found, the moment you finally understand that you were never alone, even in your darkest hour. Someone was watching, someone was writing letters, someone was standing outside your school in the cold wanting to hold you, choosing not to, because keeping you safe was more important than keeping you close. Every spring when the sap begins to run and the sure house fills with sweet-smelling steam, I think of her. I think of her stubbornness, her courage, her unbreakable love, and I say thank you. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for believing in us. Thank you for giving us a place to belong. We are home now, Grandma. We are finally home.